Welcome to the Beyond Motion podcast, where we dive into the latest innovations and trends of biomechanics. My name is Zach Scarano, and I am here as always with my co-host, Lindsey Hennington.
Hello.
And we are very excited today to have our guest, Pro Stergiou of Sport Product Testing and the Canadian Sport Institute in Alberta. Pro, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Zach. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Enjoying this. We have it's winter time in Arizona, and so it's the best weather possible. Maybe a bit nicer than what you guys might be experiencing up there, but I don't want to brag or anything like that.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous. Yes, we
Yeah.
we we have snow on the ground. So
Yeah. Yeah, it starts to get pretty cold up there at this time of year, huh?
it does. It does. Yeah. It started a little bit
So,
earlier than usual this year.
oh, really? That's good though. At least maybe you can get some time on the slopes.
Yeah, or come and join you in Arizona sometime soon.
That's right.
Yeah,
You're
the
always
invitation is open anytime.
All right. Super.
exactly open door policy. But no, we appreciate you joining us today. We're excited to have you on. I think when we were going back and forth about different guests that we could have on, your name popped into my head just because, we've worked together over the years. Obviously, you've used some Naraxon equipment in your work, and I've had some exposure to kind of what you do. And thought it was just super interesting, what you work on at the sport product testing and at the lab there up at CSI. But maybe you can just take us through kind of a brief history, like how did you get started?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about CSI Alberta. So the CSI Alberta is Canadian Sport Institute Alberta. Um, we have been in existence for about 31 years now. We are a not-for-profit organization. And we basically work with our athletes, Olympic and high performance athletes, to help make them bigger, fitter, stronger. So we do have a facility, weight room, lab space, and things like that for actually gathering information about athlete health, performance, in which we would use tools like the Naraxon tools to actually capture that kind of information, either biomechanically or physiologically.
Hmm.
And we work with our athletes, like I said, to make them bigger, fitter, stronger. More specifically, I co-founded a group called Sport Product Testing with my colleague John Horton, probably about 10 years ago now, in which we are a business unit, if you will, within the Canadian Sport Institute Alberta. And we work with companies to help them understand their products and make them better. So we don't design and engineer products, but we analyze products for um, accuracy, for usability, and that could be three different sort of vertical markets that we work in with these companies. So we work with all the big sporting goods brands in the world, but we could work on questions related to footwear or athletic footwear specifically. And most of the time, we're looking at biomechanics types of questions when we're looking at that and using, like I said, tools like Noraxon's products and motion capture cameras and force plates and things like that to analyze the biomechanics. We work with companies as well too in the apparel space. Mostly in the apparel space, we would be answering questions related to physiology and maybe more specific thermal physiology. So we have an environmental chamber, for example, that we could put people into, um, make the chamber really cold or really hot and humid, depending on what we're trying to test, and get some information about skin temperature, moisture, core temperature, heart rate, other physiologic metrics that could be affected by the use of apparel, either in a cold or hot environment. So that's the second vertical that we work in. The third vertical is wearable technology. And I guess most of the conversation in this particular podcast is going to be related to wearable technology. So with wearable technology, we help our customers understand how accurate the products are. So if somebody is actually, I'm not wearing my wearable technology right now because it's being recharged. Um, um, we would be looking at specific metrics that could be measured or measuring from a human being. That might be heart rate, that might be blood oxygenation, SpO2, or it might be motion based. So how many steps you're taking, the distance you're traveling, the speed that you're traveling at, so on and so forth, and helping the engineers and developers of these companies understand how accurate and how reliable these products are. So we would be doing testing on accuracy. And then lastly, across the whole spectrum of those three verticals, we also would help our customers that we work with understand the usability of those products. And when I talk about usability of the products, understanding from a consumer's perspective, you know, how comfortable is that product? Is that product measuring what you expected it to measure? Is accuracy actually even important to you as a consumer? Or is color more important to you? Is things like that. So there are other aspects of what we delve in across that wide spectrum, is really understanding people's perceptions to the use of that product in that particular environment that product's supposed to be used. So those are the three markets that we work with: footwear, athletic footwear, athletic apparel, or apparel in general for lifestyle, and then also wearable technology, looking at how valid, accurate, reliable products are as well too, as they're making measurements from the human being.
Very cool. So what you're saying is you've got a whole bunch of toys that you get to use to measure all the new up and coming toys in
Absolutely.
this space.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly it.
um before we kind of start diving into maybe some of those deeper aspects, I'm just curious, like what led you to even forming sport product testing in the first place? How did that decision come about?
So interestingly enough, we there were some things in the background. I'm not going to get into the sort of details of the political things of why we
Sure.
created sport product testing, but I've always been sort of in this industry, in this environment for many, many years, and for most of my career as well too. My career has taken me to medical devices as well too. So I was actually doing business development of medical devices outside of sport products, but always involved with products that are measuring metrics of human health or performance or whatever that is. So we started sport product testing because we knew there was a need, and the need specifically was related to all of these companies are contracting out their services to get product testing services outside of their official labs and internal resources that they have that do this type of stuff. So there's always a need for them to do it for various different reasons. Either they don't have the capacity or the resources to do it in-house. Their resources have been maxed out, or they're looking for a third party unbiased group to actually do this research. Similar to when a pharmaceutical company is creating a drug, they can't do the clinical trials in-house. They actually have to, contract out a university and whoever to actually do those clinical trials. Similar situations exist in this space where they would be coming to us if they're making any claims or anything like that. So that's what they would look for our services. And we, as a group, have been doing this in various different capacity for many, many years. I used to work actually doing similar stuff at the University of Calgary for various different companies. And there was a huge need and opportunity to grow this kind of business outside a university setting as well too. So I think that a lot of these companies really appreciate that. I always say that we do university quality research, but we're not a university, is a huge value to these companies, because being frank with the group and the audience, it's difficult working with a university in general too. So there's a lot of red tape working with universities. So I think a lot of our customers and clients really appreciate that we cut through all that red tape and we can actually sign a contract in 2 days, and it doesn't take us 6 months to get a contract signed to do work.
Sure, and maybe keep some of the discrete information discrete versus,
Exactly.
a lot of the stuff at the university level, especially if it's a high level R1 institution or anything like that. They typically have to kind of project out to the world what maybe their money or resources are being spent on.
Absolutely. And publishing is important. Publishing
Yep.
isn't so important to us. So we sort of forego that and tell the people that we work with, not important to us. It's your data, it's your information, it's your intellectual property. And we understand that as well too. So I also have had experience on the industry side of things. So I used to work at Nike many years ago,
Okay.
understand how they work, and also have been involved in some startup companies in the past that have been in the space of wearable technology, albeit a couple of decades ago. But that's where my deep passion and understanding about wearable technology in general and the importance of accurate, valid products and things like that really stemmed from that passion going back to probably over 20 years ago, probably about 25 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, it's incredible when you look at that history and you kind of see where it's at today and how a lot of these devices are sort of becoming ubiquitous. I mean, in terms of, the watches or Whoop Band or something like that. I mean, or a ring. Everybody's got something, that's measuring it. And then you get to know that, you were working at a company, like you said, a couple decades ago that was
Yep.
maybe pioneering some of this stuff, but at the same time was very early. Uh, did that have any effect on kind of the progress that you guys were making back then? That just the
Oh,
timing wasn't working very well. The community at large wasn't ready for the the data.
well, yeah, I think that the timing was very interesting, and I think the timing was right on for that company and the success of that company. That company actually went on to be purchased by Garmin, so Garmin actually owns that company
Oh wow.
that I'm
Oh,
talking
wow.
about 25 years ago that I was working for as a startup company. Now, when I say the timing was right, is that you have to look at sort of technology, the cost of technology, the cost of actually manufacturing that technology. And then ultimately, if you're trying to make a consumer product, you have to make it in terms of not only the features of that product, but the cost of that product for a consumer product. So
Hmm.
let me tell you a little bit of history about back then as well too. Again, I'm not going to mention any names and stuff like that,
Yeah.
um, but that you know that they're owned by Garmin now, and they actually exist close to Calgary. The community can probably know the company I'm talking about, but
Yeah, someone will figure it out.
someone will figure it out, right? Um, Back then, we weren't using IMUs, but it was accelerometers, just accelerometers, right?
Hmm.
We as researchers, even before the 25 years I'm talking about, have been using accelerometers for research purposes. Taking accelerometers, I crazy glued them onto the shin exactly too, right? Like, believe it or not, in one study I was doing. The big thing, however, with the accelerometer and stuff, one little accelerometer that would measure acceleration not in 3 dimensions. The 3 dimensional accelerometers were very big, bulky, and expensive. It was in one
Hmm.
dimension. So you one axis accelerometer, crazy glued to the shin, would probably cost a researcher back then probably $2,000-3,000 to actually buy one of these
Wow.
accelerometers.
That's crazy thinking about what that cost equates to today and how much more you can get for it.
Right. And you guys have IMUs for your systems, and you can understand that you're not paying $2,000-3,000 for one of those parts and stuff. But back then that was the cost. We as researchers in this community knew the value of measuring acceleration for research purposes and stuff like that. Fast forward to 25 years ago, this company that was started, one of the key things was how can we use acceleration and actually take the acceleration and integrate it to actually get displacement. Now, there are a bunch of mathematical and engineering feats to actually, overcome and stuff like that. This company and one specific person in that company who was an engineer developed the algorithms, if you will, the programs for accurately measuring distance traveled. If you were to put an accelerometer or a couple of accelerometers, actually, the theory was back then, a couple of accelerometers on a board to measure distance, like an
Hmm.
odometer for your foot, or a
Yeah.
speedometer as well too. So you can take the distance, you can then work backwards as well too to look at speed as well too. So back in the day, accelerometers too were very still pricey and stuff like that. This company actually took this technology, and it was a big box that had a wire in the back,
Hmm.
and the system was really big and bulky, and they sold it to a company. It was Nike back then, who originally started selling what was called the speed distance monitor. Right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Back then, it was this big box, and they convinced Nike, hey, we can miniaturize this, put it on a foot, put it out through a shoelace with one battery, and wirelessly transmit information to a watch. Hence, the wireless transmission protocol as well too was not good enough to
Right.
use Bluetooth back then, or Zigbee or other wireless transmission protocols. This company developed their own. They developed their own, and they call it Ant. If you ever heard
Right.
of Ant
Yep.
Yep.
or Ant
Hmm.
Plus, that was developed by the startup company. Garmin now owns Ant, FYI,
Ah,
because
Very cool.
that's why they purchased the company primarily, was for the wireless
for the
protocol.
wireless, yeah.
Right. So Ant was a very low power. Bluetooth is a power pig when it comes to, so tiny area sending packets of information on, off to save battery power. That's the value of it. So I guess getting to the story as well too is when I'm talking timing was right, that back then you had to sell a product in that particular space, and Nike did their due diligence to say, what price point do we have to get this product to actually get somebody to buy it? What are other similar products that they're buying? There was really nothing similar, but tried to get it to a retail price point of about $299 US for this product, which was a speedometer for a runner,
Yeah.
right? I think.
Yeah. That seems like a big project considering how much the actual 1D accelerometer cost at that
Right.
time.
Exactly. And then that was the thing. However, timing was bang on right. Was back about 25 years ago, accelerometers were not being produced in the millions, but they were being produced in the hundreds, if you will, right? In terms of manufacturers, because only researchers like biomechanics researchers wanted these.
Hmm.
Back about 25 years ago, can you guess what industry drove the price of accelerometers down because the demand and the supply sort of hit up? Where are accelerometers you guys believe that are in everyday products that you're using on a daily basis?
Cell
I
phones.
I would
Sorry?
say automotive.
Automotive.
Oh, I was gonna
Yeah.
say cell phones too,
Cell
but
phones
Yeah.
now
we're
too, but that was
we're
after
probably we're
automotive.
talking back then, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a
You
little bit too new, huh?
you're a little bit too young, too
Yeah.
Lindsay, to do that. But it was the automotive industry. So the automotive industry at the same time said, hey, we need things to deploy our airbags. We need things.
Hmm.
There are accelerometers and IMUs all over your automobile now, right?
Hmm.
So the automotive industry was then saying to the manufacturers, hey, we need lots of these. That drove the price down.
Mm.
And that's the only reason, one of the only reasons as well, to why that product was successful. Because if an accelerometer was still, you're even buying them in the hundreds, cost, the company that was manufacturing $500, well, you're going to have to sell this product for maybe $1,000 now, or even more than $1,000. It wouldn't be a very viable consumer product. And then cell phones as well too, Lindsay. Obviously now, you have all that stuff. And the other thing as well too is that GPS was not in the state yet to be making the speed distance measurements as well too. When I was saying this in the
Mm.
state, some of the original GPS products that were in watches and stuff were real power pigs. Again, when I talk about power pigs, is that the GPS signal to, constant to the satellites and stuff like that draws a lot of power. So watches were not even lasting. I mean, I had a GPS golf watch back probably about 20 years ago that wouldn't, and it was supposed to track my position on a golf course and plot my shots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was from a company called Sunto. And
Hmm.
this watch wouldn't even last, the battery wouldn't last a round of golf. So I'm like, well, what's the point of this watch, right? Because the GPS. So timing is everything. Those accelerometers and the price being driven down allowed this product to be introduced to market. And then the market started, sort of that whole wearable device market really started being built upon that technology that was actually started and being built. And then every other company started developing their own wearable product, device, and things like that. And then companies like Apple, like Garmin, got into the market as well too, if you will. And
Hmm.
everything became risk-based because GPS was, the speed distance monitor. So you no longer have to put devices on your feet, if you want to just measure speed and distance. But there are some devices and wearable technologies that athletes are wearing right now. One product that we've used in the past called Liomo, which actually you put some Excel IMUs on your feet, on your thighs, and one on your sacrum that measure things like your step length, your foot position, your
Hmm.
ankle position, things like that. Can make some pretty gross biomechanical measurements. Some of your systems and your portable IMU systems that can look at joint angles and things like that. Doesn't get to that level, but looks more at gross biomechanics stuff. So I can talk forever. I'll let you guys
Wow.
continue asking questions.
No, it's fascinating because it's, while the sort of wearable revolution, from the consumer's perspective, maybe didn't actually kick off until, let's call it the better part of 10 years ago. All of the sort of building blocks that were necessary for that to even be part of the user experience, were taking place in areas that you may not have even understood, right? For example, like the fact that the automotive industry decided that they needed all of the computerized, essentially, operation parts within their vehicles, uh, and then you couple that with the way that processing power
Hmm.
and the people, the ability of these smaller chips to be able to be
Hmm.
manufactured and handle more information. The wireless communication protocols, it's like you start to have all these different elements that are just kind of slowly fusing together to get to where we're at now, where yeah, you can have something the size of a ring, delivering a bunch of activity and physiological data at this point, which is pretty incredible. Um,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it really puts into perspective how almost lucky we had to get to be in this position at all. Just because all of those things had to converge at once. For those of you listening, I accidentally knocked the microphone away from my face. But yeah, I loved hearing the background because I think that's something that not a lot of people are aware of, the background of all those things that had to happen for us to be even in the situation where we could have these wearables that track so many things just
Mhm.
on your wrist at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, well said, Lindsay.
And so, I mean, I guess your experience in that the sort of early days probably had a big influence then when you did eventually start sport product testing and kind of the, let's say the critical perspective that you were able to take to form this business unit and really, like you said, deliver that unbiased evaluation of these products
Hmm.
because you're like, I know every layer to this thing. So I'm going to find these fail points and I'm going to tell
Hmm.
you about them, whether you like it or not, I guess is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And those fail points, I think through our experience and the experiences that we've had, we understand those consumer fail points. We're not
Sure.
only looking at those engineering fail points. Because I tell people all the time, you can make a product 100% accurate. I mean, hey, this device is, the best thing since sliced bread and it's 100% accurate. So who cares on the consumer side is they might not care. They might
Right.
not care in
Yeah.
that feature. They might not care. So we have to take a consumer, because this is a consumer product. We're talking
Mm,
about a wearable device, a wrist-based wearable device perspective on that. It may do the things the best way, but it might be ugly, right? Or not the right color. I mean, those are all things that we really understand as well too, and bring perspective in to help the developers and designers of these products. um, yes, it's a product that's 100% accurate. Give you some perspective on where we were testing a wearable device at one time. Um, we did some usability testing, and we allowed people to use the product, the fit feel of the product, the function of the app. We're evaluating different aspects of that, and it was a great product. And a couple people, or one person, came back and said, this product got really hot on my wrist when I was driving in my car in the wintertime. There was hot air blowing on it, and it said
Hmm.
the band got extremely hot,
mm.
right? So there was some retention of heat in the band that person said I took it off and I had a red mark on my arm. I didn't like that. So there's things beyond the engineering things, but I'm just bringing that as an example of um, really the usability of the product and really understanding what the consumer is saying as well too, about the product is a very important piece.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got kind of a couple of these different factors that go into whether or not, your evaluation, I guess. Um, Without maybe giving up the secret sauce, how would you categorize those factors? Like, what's most important, do you think, maybe from your perspective? Is it usability? Is it accuracy? Is it reliability? user friendliness, like those types of things. Is there any sort of scale to that, or is it just kind of everything's important and maybe some have a little bit more importance depending on who you're ultimately trying to sell this thing to?
I think that the latter part, what you
Yeah.
said, it all depends on who you're trying to sell this product to. For example, if you're trying to sell a product to somebody that is elderly, that might
Mm,
not be um, so used to technology itself, the usability and the simple usability is probably at the top of the food chain there. The other thing as well too is that you and I and other people like that are having to charge our cell phones and things like that on a nightly basis. Um, the power consumption and how long those battery lasts might be different for somebody that's used to doing it versus somebody that's not used to doing it. So,
mm,
so again, the battery life. These are common things that a consumer is saying that is important, and you'll see some of the companies marketing that battery life of this. Right, that's important to a consumer. Accuracy is important to a consumer. Now, accuracy might be more or less important to a certain consumer. An athlete might be able to live with less accuracy. It's like, okay, I know there's less accuracy. May tell me I'm taking 10,000 steps a day, but that's plus or minus 100 steps I can live with. A physician that is using a monitor on a patient to monitor their heart vitals or whatever else, they
hmm.
might need it. Again, I'm using this 100% accuracy thing. They can't live with inaccuracy. So it depends on the user. So the accuracy is probably more important to a healthcare practitioner, but less important to a daily use person or even an athlete or even a lower level athlete, not a high performance athlete. So it all depends on what's important. But when it comes down to it, I can tell you what's important for me as a consumer in using wearable technology. One of the most important things, and I may be biased on this because this is the business I'm in, is the accuracy of the product. I really want to
Sure.
understand that product is measuring what it's supposed to be measuring, right? And that if I'm monitoring my heart rate, that if my heart rate is indeed 125 beats at rest, usually my heart rate is 65, then there is something wrong. But if I know that this product is plus or minus 65 beats per minute, plus or minus 65 beats, then then there's a wide range of inaccuracy. So accuracy is important to me. And the next thing is that's most important to me too, as a user of a wearable device, is the ease of use to the connectivity on my mobile device.
Mm,
I
Mm.
really like the features. This is outside of any kind of health or whatever monitoring, but the usability of that product and the stability of that product to make sure it's always connected to my phone, not losing connectivity, um, and easy to troubleshoot if there's problems and things like that is a very important piece. And I've sort of tossed away some wearable devices for that fact matter as well too. It's like this is always disconnecting. I don't know what's going on. This company has to do something better with that, but that is sort of two of my key things is accuracy and usability and connectivity to my mobile device, which is important to me in my wearable device.
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like from your background, you bring a good perspective on the accuracy of
Mhm.
how these products should be performing and just your experience as a user of these devices. You also clearly have some opinions. How has working with athletes influenced your understanding of those comfort factors and usability factors specifically for people that are using these technologies from an athletic performance perspective?
Yeah, and I'll use the perspective of a high performance or Olympic athlete because that's typically who we've dealt with before. That require have different needs than a recreational type athlete would matter. But the technology and the use of technology, wearable devices, for example, for athletes, have served primarily a purpose of them getting information about themselves during training, right? So, what are we doing? How are we training? What is my heart rate? What is my, whatever other metrics, repetitions or what I'm doing in terms of if they're jogging or running, my speed and distance and whatever else. Um, that is one aspect as well too, that I think that athletes have um, picked up on using technology, and they also are consumers, so that I mean, they may be using an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Garmin or whatever it might be and stuff like that. They would be coming to us as well too for our opinions on what the most accurate products are for their purposes. And that's the kind of insights that we would be providing them. Hey, you know what? Go with these products because they tend to be the most accurate for your purposes. We've done some work with these companies to get that kind of information and data back to those companies. Um, I have again, I don't want to be biased here, the companies around the world that I really believe have some of the most accurate products, um, because knowing how much they're investing in R&D and stuff like that. Um, and aside from Apple, it's very difficult to get any kind of information out of Apple, or even they hardly contract out any third parties to do any work. They keep
Hmm.
everything internal. But
Yeah.
Apple has to be looked at because they have about 70% of the market share when it comes to wrist wearable devices. So that's what
Yeah.
most people are wearing. So getting back to the athlete's perspective, um, yeah, we would make recommendations. We would help them understand what products to use, and if they wanted some feedback on how to interpret that data and information, we could help them out. That's during their training, but lots of athletes now as well too, outside of their training, want to use these types of devices to monitor their activity outside of their training, um, which I've heard can be um, a pain more than a value to them. Like a specific example, hey, we're using this wearable device. One athlete came to me about probably 4 or 5 years ago saying, this device is great. It's giving me information about my training, but guess what? It's also monitoring me as I'm sitting down on the sofa, and it's buzzing at me every hour to say, get off your ass and start moving, right? Because you're not
Yeah.
moving, right? Get moving. And my Garmin device that I wear tells me the same thing too. Sometimes I'll pay attention to it, or
Yeah.
sometimes I'll swear at it.
Yeah.
But the athlete's perspective was, I just had a 3 hour workout, right?
Right. Take that into
This device,
account, right?
this device is
Yeah.
chirping at me type thing. But that's sort of one sort of funny piece of information back from an athlete. But athletes really like using these things to monitor their sleep as well too, right?
Hmm.
Sleep is a very important part of understanding your health, and looking at things like that, or even monitoring your heart rate variability during rest is a very important aspect now of athlete performance, and human health in general too. So outside of the training environment, they are using it as well too to monitor sleep, heart rate variability, and other aspects as well too. So
Sort of playing on that, or extending that a little bit, how like have the incorporation of these wearables both in training and outside of training, how do you feel like that's transforming athletes and their approach to training, to recovery, and maybe even in some ways what they're giving on the field?
yeah, I think it's revolutionized. I mean, it's really providing data that wasn't available. Sorry, I have a little bit of a throat tickle that before I start coughing furiously here. Um, it has provided them with the information data that hasn't been possible, especially outside of their daily training environment. If you will, if they were in the weight room, we could have other tools like video cameras and force
Hmm.
plates and things like that we could monitor, measure their performance. But outside in their sort of daily living environment, I think it's provided them with data they've never had before. The big however here is that, excuse me, um, the meaning of this data. And I think
Mm.
that the industry, the wearable device industry, is giving more and more and more data, because the sensor cost, and going back to that accelerometer cost way back in the day, hey, we can produce a sensor for 10 cents. Why wouldn't we put it in our wearable device, right? It can
Yeah.
measure your glucose level, or it can measure this. So they're adding all these sensors, they're adding all these things, and yeah, they're semi-accurate. Some of them are, some of them aren't. We can have that discussion on a separate podcast. But um, now you're providing all this data, and I think that athletes and general consumers alike are becoming overwhelmed now,
Mm.
that they're now saying, so what, right?
Right.
Give you an example of you know, in my Garmin device, it actually has relax reminders, or it says you have to relax. Or how is
Hmm.
it? I'm not stressed. I'm lying here. I feel, damn good. I don't feel stressed. So I don't believe that. I don't know how it's coming up with that, relax reminder. Or there is a body battery, showing me my body battery.
Hmm.
Huh.
That mean if I don't have enough sleep, I don't regenerate my battery. But the thing is, the so what? I have these numbers, but if me as an individual has a goal to use my wearable device to lose weight, I want to know which of those metrics, the steps, distance, the heart rate variability, are going to be the key things that's helping me understand I have to change this to make this effect in terms of my goals. And I think right now the industry is just dumping data towards people. And okay, the steps, people know that generally if you take 10,000 steps a day, you're healthy, whatever, that's what you might want to achieve. But all these other things, like your heart rate variability is this, or your this is that, there has to be some analysis of that data to provide something back that is valuable to the consumer. And from an athlete perspective, that might be a pretty lofty goal, is I
Hmm.
would like to win a gold medal at the Olympics.
Yeah.
Right.
How is this device going to help me? And it's going to be one piece, because I not only have to train well and use the data from this device to understand what I'm doing good and bad to perform, but I have to eat well, I have to sleep well, I have to do all these things. So they have to also understand how this device is going to be valuable to ultimately their goal. Like I said, it's a lofty goal, it's a all encompassing, but they want to win a gold medal.
Right. Yeah, you've got obviously athletes, especially elite athletes, right? They're used to being coached all the time, right? They're in
Right.
training all the time, every day in most cases. Uh, so from my perspective, by that, it's kind of like, when they're not in training, like they kind of don't want to hear from anybody. They might
Yeah.
just want to be in tune to themselves and so in some ways like they're like, no, don't put that on me because I don't want any feedback unless I'm in the mood, unless I'm in that zone
Good
of
point.
getting trained.
Good
So
point.
I'd be curious to know if there is any sort of like reverse sort of psychological effects that are happening by maybe some of these groups that are in ways even requiring like these wearables to be adopted, by their athletes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good
absolutely.
question.
Yeah, it is. And I really think that in this particular environment, in the high performance sport environment, um, these products and the value of these products have to be accepted and adopted not by the athletes first, but by their
Mm,
coaches.
Yeah.
Because their coaches are the ones that tell them, and their coaches could be their training coach, their strength and power coach, their physiology, their mental performance coach. There's a bunch of
right.
different coaches. So that's who these companies are selling these products. Ultimately, they're being used by the athletes, but they have to sell them to the coaches to say,
Hmm.
athlete, you're going to be wearing this because of this. It's going to measure your heart rate variability in the morning. And I'm going to monitor that. And I'm going to, when you come in, I'm going to see that number and going to tailor your training plan based on that. And the athlete's like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool, right? So, you're going to go easy today, or you're not going to do anything, or your numbers are showing this, or, hey, I noticed you only slept 4 hours, right? Are you having problems sleeping? Do we need some, you know, mental health support or anything like that?
Yeah.
Is there anything going on? Those are the types of things that an athlete is going to accept, um, and or vice versa. I mean, it could come back to the athlete wanting to wear this device because they've heard as a consumer it can make them X, Y, Z. They would be bringing that information or that product back to their coach to say, "Hey, coach, can you help me understand that?" So those coaches in part of that ecosystem, um, albeit whatever type of coach they are a very important piece in the link.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And it's like the coaches are the ones putting those pieces of the puzzle together, so to speak, in that you have all this data. The companies selling these products to consumers are trying to communicate some messaging about like why it matters, but ultimately they might be putting together pretty diagrams of your body battery and,
Yeah.
just saying like, hey, this matters. Well, why? It's
Mhm.
kind of the coach's job to put all that information together and tell the athlete why. So
Yeah.
I think, I mean, from a broader perspective, and something that Zach and I have talked about on other podcast episodes as well, is like it is so necessary to actually analyze that information and have those professionals who know how to interpret this type of information from a movement perspective, from a physiological perspective, from a recovery perspective. Like those people are still super important regardless of how much data is out there. It's still like, why do we care just because the data exists?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we might get into this, we might as well get into this as well too. I know that part of this conversation might have been on the amount of data and what to do with it, but the the data itself too can be of a different, how should I say it, scientific background, if you will, right? So
Mm,
it could be biomechanical data, the steps, the distance, the speed. It could be physiologic data, the heart rate, the SpO2 levels. It could be heart rate variability. It could be sleep data that maybe is physiologic, whatever you want to call it.
sure.
Um, it could be data
Surveys.
related, yeah, it could be surveys. It could
Mm,
be data that's related to nutrition. Nutrition is like how many cups of water
Hmm.
have you drank today? You may have to enter it in and stuff like that. Um, so there's a bunch of different things. Now, understanding how all that data is interrelated to human athlete performance or health, if you're just not looking at an athlete perspective, is a very important area that I think has to uh, be grown, if you will, right? Because there's really not much understanding on that related to that. However, some people are looking at sort of these vertical slices across different um, human health questions or athlete performance questions that they're starting to understand how this data is related to optimizing health or performance.
yeah, it's interesting because I mean, we all know the human body is a complex system, right? You have all of these different
Mhm.
factors that go into your ability to perform, to be healthy, to achieve your goals, whatever those might be. And, you brought something up in terms of like these companies understanding that, okay, we can get access to this data, so let's just give it to them, right? Like it's kind
Mhm.
of the throw the spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks type of a scenario. In some ways, that's maybe creating a little bit of a turn-off situation for a lot of people because it just feels like chaotic and there's not really any golden thread. But at the same time, it's kind of like just the same as 25 plus years ago when researchers are looking at acceleration. They know that it's meaningful, but they don't necessarily know how to translate that into you need these other elements to start to get pieced together. Do you feel like in order for all of this sort of complex system of inputs, from nutrition, from sleep, from biomechanics, from physiologics, in order for those to start to get weaved together to actually give an answer to somebody, is that something like, we kind of have this on our list, but is that something that you think like these kind of machine learning algorithms and the way that those are starting to work with data and maybe make some sense of seemingly unrelated pieces of information start to have some sort of patterns? Do you think that that's like kind of the next wave of what's starting to be uncovered as those algorithms and that type of technology is being implemented
Yeah,
into
I
this
believe
space?
that that should be the next wave, and I believe that um, it's a lofty asking goal, um, but I really believe from a consumer's perspective, either athlete or health and wellness of a consumer perspective, that's where the industry should go.
Hmm.
Um, and in terms of, like I said, all this data, either biomechanical or physiologic, they're all intertwined one way or another, right?
Right.
You have the biomechanics metrics that are measuring a mechanical load on the system that then affects the physiologic load. So if you're walking versus running, your heart rate is going to increase, right? So mechanical load increasing, physiologic load increasing as well too. So understanding the levels and sort of the almost like the rhetorical signals that mean the same thing type thing is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically, Zach, to your question about understanding data and where I believe is going to make the biggest difference is that using a sport example, and this is something that these companies that are trying to keep their product generic, right?
Right.
This can be used across different sports. Imagine if you now say, well, this product is a hockey product, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be very valuable in the hockey community, right? If you're validating whatever your metrics in the hockey product, but it's a small market.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
the big players in the world think of this big market. So adding more features, adding more things is just bringing in different opportunities for different people and markets to use it. But really, let's take an example of like the health and wellness market and really understanding how data from wearable devices can be used specifically to, help diagnose or treat a specific type of ailment. And let's use just the example of mental health. I mean, that is a very wide topic when we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about that. But if, and there is research in this area, but again, understanding how these products can provide information back to a consumer to say, we as researchers, we as product developers, whatever, have to ask, I believe, a very specific question and answer that question. So we have a hypothesis that we're going to test and say that data like the amount of steps that you take, your heart rate variability, your heart rate and your sweat or something like that, whatever it might be, are factors that we believe are related to your state of mental health. And maybe more specifically, it might be a question we want to answer is, what level of depression? And again, I'm not an expert in this area or anything like that, but you have to create a study to actually validate that, or maybe create some, machine learning algorithms to take these 5 variables and find out how that's related to predict your level of mental health and do quite a large study, because as we know in artificial intelligence, machine learning, you need large data sets,
Right.
not necessarily large amounts of variables, but a big amount of subjects as well too, to feed
Yeah.
into this to create some algorithms. So you might be able to create an algorithm that can predict your level of depression or something like that. And ultimately, that particular product that you're wearing can beep, beep, beep you to say, you know what, you might want to go see a medical health professional, or you might want to do this to try and change to motivate you because we know you're not moving as much. You might be depressed, um, whatever that might be, and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
so again, that's just a specific example. That might be or, um, you know, how this particular product can be used to predict, from an athlete performance injury perspective, that you're wearing this device and what you're doing right now and what you continue to do, you're going to injure your knee, for example. Again, an idea as well too, right? So this device can start predicting, based on your volume of what you're doing and what you're doing and a bunch of other biomechanics or physiologic metrics, may be able to be predicting that. Or the data that's gathered might be able to let us understand objectively what your level of concussion might be, and where you're at to return to play or return to sport, right? So, you know, these the data that's coming from these devices is endless, and I think the possibilities are endless. But really, I think that there has to be specific questions asked in a health element and a performance thing and really answered. Let me give you an example of what one company has done well. And I read some perspective of this on LinkedIn recently from Aura Ring. You
Mm-hmm.
guys have
Hmm.
mentioned
Yeah.
that before. And I think the perspective I read on LinkedIn was from an ex-Aura employee who gave kudos to Aura in this article. I said, hey, I was an ex-Aura employee, and this is what I applaud Aura for doing. So back 5, 6, 10 years ago, whatever, when he was involved, he said, he gives his perspective on LinkedIn, that he said, Aura decided not to go after this market, but after a specific market. And what they've done well is really looking at female health. And that's a decision they made a while back to say, hey, we can go after all market, young, elderly, whatever. But then there was a decision, we can do something well in the female health market. And I believe that the ring now can predict something to do with hormones and menstrual cycles and things like that. But
Yeah.
don't exactly know the details, but that's what he was alluding to. So that is a good example of a company saying, this is what we're going to go after. And we've done a good job here. Now let's move on to the other thing type thing, because if you're trying to please this many people by just adding features, sure, you're going to get people to buy your products. But really, you're not, doing good for humankind, I guess, if you will. So
Yeah. I have a question sort of diving back to your role or sport products testing role with testing these types of technologies. Do you find yourself validating things like, is it counting the steps correctly? Like things that you have some sort of gold standard that you could measure against? Or are you asked to validate some of these more like, is it taking in all these metrics and then reporting again, your example, like your body battery accurately? Like, are you asked to validate things like that where there's no standard to go against at all?
So more for the former. So we're being asked to validate versus on a specific metric. And I'll give you an example of that we've recently done. And most of these metrics are actually, I don't want to say newer type metrics, but steps and the step count and stuff like that. That's sort of, I don't want to say being beat over the head, but sort of
Yeah.
generally these things work well and they don't really care about that. The consumer knows that they're going to, achieve a certain amount of steps. 10,000 might be in their mind. So it's more the physiologic metrics that we're being asked to validate. And the specific
Okay.
example I want to give is one that we just finished for Polar, the heart rate monitoring company, is we were validating SpO2 sensing from the wrist. And I can talk more freely about this because this is Polar wanted us to publish this, and this is published in Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise as a validation study. It just was published in October, I think, or maybe it just came out at the beginning of November in
Oh,
MSSE.
wow. Very
So
recent. That's huge.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we validated SpO2 sensing from the wrist. Any kind of sensing, SpO2 sensing uses a light-based sensor to actually measure SpO2. You guys might know SpO2 sensing the best from the pulse oximeter, the one that goes on your fingertip in the
Yep.
hospital. So uses a little bit different technology than the one on the wrist, but in essence, similar concept. Measures the hemoglobin that's attached to the blood by shining a light on and looking at capillaries and things like that. So the gold standard validation for that is not the pulse oximeter. The pulse oximeter is an estimation as well too. It's actually blood oxygenation in the artery. So we actually had catheterization into the radial artery
Oh, wow.
to make simultaneous blood draws. While this was actually, we had the device on the left hand and the radial catheter into the radial artery in the right hand. So simultaneously, we were making measurements of SpO2 and SaO2, the arterial blood oxygenation, and then looking at the correlation or the relationship between these two measurements, the gold standard versus the device on the wrist, while people were at rest, first of all, because these types of optical sensors, so that if you think that your SpO2 level can be measured while you're moving your hands at all, not going to happen. Very inaccurate. So dead rest, optimal lab conditions, as somebody is warm, covered in a blanket. So there's a bunch of lab conditions that, again, you're taking them to the outside, that we did while people are breathing different concentrations of oxygen. So we started the protocol, them breathing room air, 21% oxygen, then 18%, 16%, 14%, and 12% oxygen. So we took them stepwise down. Normal SpO2 levels in a healthy human at sea level is probably between 95 and 100% of blood oxygenation. Some people at the 12% oxygen were going to low 70%, for example, for very short periods of time. So there was some risk to this, but that is a protocol that the ISO actually requires companies that create pulse oximeters and other things like that are getting FDA approval, medical device technology approval. So we
Huh.
followed that protocol specifically and then gave the company back information on how accurate their products are. Knowing that as you start decreasing your blood oxygenation concentration, it becomes, the bands become, in terms of the accuracy, wider and wider. It becomes less and less
Yeah.
accurate. So they would use that information to put back into their algorithms to understand this is, you know, one of the most accurate products because we followed this protocol to validate these things. So
Wow.
I'll give my sort of plug out to Polar. Back then, I said some of the most accurate products on the market. I would have to say that Polar has some of the most accurate products. Yet they're
Right.
not making much penetration in the marketplace for wearable technology in North America. They do a good job in Europe, but the market in North America is saturated by Apple and by Garmin. Those are
Yeah.
the big things that actually have a market share. So the other point that you had asked as well too, Lindsay, was what was your other point I was going to get back to now? Yeah,
You might have a better memory than I do.
I don't. I answered the question about the accuracy, but then you said something else that I was going to get back to, but now I forgot.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll remember.
maybe it'll come to us.
No,
Um,
I think you brought up something though, Pro, that's interesting. Is kind of the misconceptions about wearable devices and where accuracy actually ends up being true or not, right? And kind of what those conditions are. And obviously, when we're talking about consumer products, you know, the engineering and product teams, they try their best, but then eventually it gets handed over to marketing, and marketing's like, yeah, enough with that stuff. We're we're gonna say this, and we'll put the asterisk next to it. And if somebody wants to look into that, then they can, kind of a thing. But
yeah,
that often then goes to the consumer level, and they start putting a lot of trust into these things that may or may not actually be giving them the information that's accurate and potentially useful.
Exactly, and like you said, like I said, the test that we do for the accuracy in this case, we're in very controlled lab conditions.
Hmm.
That's not the outside world. So we put the device on the individual. We make sure it's fitting properly. Now you're talking about giving a device in a box to a consumer. And guess what? The fit of that product around the wrist, either too loose or too tight, will dictate the accuracy. If it's too tight, it's restricting blood flow and
Right.
it's not going to measure too well. If it's too loose, we have something called motion artifact that it's moving back and forth on the wrist that causes some huge errors too. So, like you said, Zach, I mean, there's one thing to test products. Like medical devices is one thing because you can have a medical device that's being used in the hospital for a patient lying in a bed
Hmm.
that a nurse or a doctor or a technician is putting this product on. They are the one that's implementing that. Those
Right.
accuracies and the lab tests that are done dictate that particular environment. But the accuracies that we're talking about that we do in a lab environment, you can throw a lot of that out the window when you go into an outdoor environment, you know, giving this to a human being to put on. Like you said, you can give the marketing people, Zach might say, okay, we understand engineers that this product has to be worn like this, like this, like this. We can give people instructions on it. But we don't, as marketing people, we don't want to make it too complex and too confusing because the person, the consumer is like, that's way too confusing. I'm not going to use that product, right?
Right.
Right. So they're
yeah,
going to sort of forego some things and say, here you go, make sure it's done properly and press this button and away you go, right?
Yep.
yeah. That's interesting because I was gonna ask you too, with that in mind, where like we're talking about something like a watch, where how tight you put it matters because you either have motion artifact or restricted blood flow. Do you find Do you see there being utility in manufacturers providing like calibration instructions for better
Absolutely. Yeah.
accuracy? You know, like, and do you think people would follow it? Like, do you think that it would make it maybe it'd be less accessible because the average consumer just wants to put it on and go, but it would be more accurate, certainly, right?
Let me go back to my days back at the startup company. Um, the original product that was sold by Nike had instructions for calibrating and how it was actually I don't want to say marketed, but how it was in the brochure, hold up brochure that came out. It said, out of box, this thing is, I think it was 93% accurate. Here's instructions to calibrate it, where if you calibrate it, you can make it 98% accurate.
Hmm.
So it gave the consumer the choice.
Huh.
And I can't tell you, I don't know how many people and how it would have calibrated versus uncalibrated, but it gave the consumer the choice to do it, right?
It'd be very interesting to get sort of numbers on that from
It
like a
would be.
psychology perspective, right? Like what percentage of people actually cared enough to calibrate it versus 93% cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So even and then I'm thinking back to another product way back in the world. My GPS golf watch actually back, this was like 25 years ago. I'm talking about GPS using a watch 25 years ago. Never heard of that. But I remember back then it was actually telling me that I could calibrate as well too. And it was strongly recommended that I calibrate, that I pointed east, pointed north, pointed whatever. That I had to know that as well too, to actually say that. And also, I think at one point it actually said that if I want to take my watch in my car and drive around a very specific route, I forget what it was, how it was calibrated, but it would actually tell you, you can make this work better if you calibrate it. And
Hmm.
me, as a data geek, an accuracy geek, I did that, right?
Yeah.
Now, whether or not I actually did the experiment where I tried uncalibrated versus calibrated to see how accurate it was, I didn't do that. But I would have been one of those people that would have gone through the process to calibrate it. I haven't seen wearable devices, trying to think back, that I've ever had to calibrate my watch on a specific metric. So
Yeah, I can't think of an experience on my end either,
No.
with that. But that's super interesting. And, like you said, maybe giving the option is really the key there because clearly there's a whole slew of people and probably the majority of them that are fine with the 93% accuracy, the good enough,
yeah,
like this is fine for what I am interested in learning about myself. And, I'm not trying to recover that extra 2, 3%. But then there's that other side that's like, no, like I need this detailed information in order to make these adjustments. And I think in particular, that's where, coming back to kind of like the elite athlete world, it starts to actually make a difference because those margins of error influence the sliver margins of success that these elite athletes are coming up against. If you're trying to have any sort of meaningful change in your ability to perform, and the margin of error of the
absolutely.
data that you're trusting is outside of that, then I mean, what's the point? You're not really doing anything for yourself. So it's like you have to ensure that you've got this accurate, reliable information because otherwise you're just the same as anybody else, in
Yeah,
terms of using these devices.
yeah.
Yeah. It kind of brings into another thought that I have is there's an interesting dichotomy almost between the accessibility of this technology versus the actionability, right?
Mm,
Like if it's you have all this data and maybe it's not calibrated, you wear it however you want, is you have data just to have data, but does it really mean anything if it's not calibrated, if it's not accurate? Can you even action on it? Can you make decisions on it?
mm,
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like you have this super consumer friendly device
Hmm.
that maybe at the end of the day, what you built it for isn't like to provide this information about how performance or, you know, heart rate or whatever. Like maybe the data just doesn't even mean anything if you don't care about using it the proper way. So just an interesting thing to think about, like their levels, right? Those elite athletes, they need that accuracy. Like that's the difference
Hmm.
between winning a gold medal and winning a silver medal.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you guys are, bang on. I mean, getting back to that calibration of that product that I talked about, 93% for 98, the calibration was very easy. Go to a track, run 400 meters, stop, stop and you're actually calibrating it based on your running stride as well too. Because
Mm.
what they found was a heel toe runner versus a flat footed versus a toe runner. It was actually optimized more for a heel toe runner. So if you were more of a toe runner, and I think it was written in there as well too that it would be strongly recommended if you were a toe runner to calibrate it, right? To
Mm-hmm.
actually give it,
Okay.
because it gives you more accurate. But yeah, the different levels of accuracy are important to different people. An elite athlete versus like me looking at the data for my health, or my physician actually wanting that data on me, and things like that. Is there's different levels of, when accuracy is more or less important. But the other thing also, and this is another personal perspective on using wearable devices, is I, as an individual, lose interest fast when it comes to, okay, so it's told me my whatever. Like, let's talk about sleep, for example, right? So I was like enamored with, years ago with, oh, this is great. This tell me when, oh, look at this. I woke up and went to the washroom and picked that up, and it did this. And I was in REM sleep here, deep sleep there. After about a month's time, sort of that looking at that data on a daily basis wears off. It's like the, again, the so what thing, right? Type thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, being frank with you guys is that I'm using my wearable device now on occasion to spot check some things about my health. Hey, I feel like I'm resting here, but I want to see my heart rate. So I'll say, what is my optical heart rate here? Or I want to see my SpO2 level if it has an SpO2 sensor, whatever it might be. Doing some spot checks throughout the day on occasion, occasionally. But that daily data, the sleep data, everything else, like, it's lost its novelty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unless then I start feeling unwell, maybe, or something like that. Hey, I want to look at the historical data before to see, is my sleep being affected before I actually get the symptoms of an illness, of flu or whatever else. But first and foremost, right now, I just that connectivity to the phone, and oh, there's an email, there's whatever else, and I'm so hooked on that, if you will. And lucky I don't have my watch on my wrist right now, because if my phone was buzzing, I would be like, oh, who's emailing me, who's texting me, who's whatever else,
Or it's
rather
telling
than
me to get up and move.
Yeah.
right, or telling me to get up and move and stuff like that. So, but I know how to fool that as well too. I just sort of swing my arm on the side here and, get the
Mm.
accelerometer, thinking that I'm walking, right? So,
That's the thing. You know how to cheat the system. You know exactly how all this
yeah,
technology is supposed to
I want to
work.
get, I'm sitting on the sofa at nighttime. I want to get to my 10,000 steps. I just have my arm swinging on the side here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when I was a kid in elementary school, we did this sort of competition where we wanted to see who got the most steps. So the school gave everyone pedometers,
Mhm.
and you had kids sitting at their desk just like tapping their foot to get all their step count up.
Yeah, exactly. So pedometers and things like that. We actually did we were developing, we developed at this, you know, company again, way back in the day. We developed the first activity monitor. This was a an ankle-based activity monitor. So we took the accelerometer from the top of the foot for a sport product and put it around the ankle using a sleeve. Because this was way ahead of its time, a device that was measuring your motion, your locomotion, your steps, and things like that, similar to what, a wearable device would be doing on your wrist today. And we did an event. You guys have heard of the Calgary Stampede? Have
Yeah.
you heard of the Calgary Stampede?
Yeah. It's a big rodeo.
Big rodeo
Yeah.
fair, whatever, 10-day event here in July. So we threw it out to, we were just developing this product. We were developing this product for the health and wellness market. And the question was, is Stampede healthy for you? So during Stampede, people drink a lot of alcohol, eat a lot of corn dogs. And so from a nutritional perspective, we knew it wasn't healthy for you. The question was, are people more active? Are they moving around during Stampede? Are they not? And yes, indeed. So we had the mayor of Calgary at that time participate in this and made it a whole thing. So we did find out we had individuals wearing it for a week before Stampede and then during the week of Stampede as well too, and compared the results of 10 individuals, including the mayor. And sure enough, we concluded statistically that yes, Stampede is healthier from you from a perspective of moving more, but we didn't take into account all the beer that you drink and all the French fries that you eat and things like that. So,
It's a zero-sum game that week.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Whatever
but
you gained, you lost immediately.
Yeah.
but that product as well too failed in the marketplace because we were engineering a product that was 100% accurate. But guess what? People do not like wearing something around their ankle.
Hmm.
Makes them feel
We
like a
got
criminal.
Bingo. We had
Yeah,
many
that's
people come
funny.
back and saying, this one lady was like, I was being stared at by this person at a grocery store. And I finally said to the person, what are you looking at? And they're like, are you on probation or something like that? And
Oh my gosh.
ankle monitor, right? And she was like, that was it. I couldn't wear it afterwards because
Yeah.
now people thought I was a criminal. So yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is
It's
interesting.
it's funny how all those different factors, I like that's not even something that probably came to mind when, you guys were initially developing
No,
because
no, I absolutely not, right? But
yeah,
we had our engineer hat on, right? We had
sure. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has to be on the leg because it's more accurate. But some of the other people also brought up, why don't we put it on the wrist? People were like, nah, it's, your arms are not moving like your legs are. If we're trying to measure locomotion, well, biomechanically, yeah, your arm moves contralaterally to your other leg. So yeah, you can get information and voila, guess what? Everything's on the wrist these days.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing as well, too, in terms of wearable technology. SpO2 sensing is very poor on the wrist, but it has to be on the wrist because that's what consumers are going to wear it. I can put a sensor on your forehead or on your earlobe
In your ear,
and
yeah.
get very accurate information. There's great blood perfusion there. But who's going to want to wear a band on their ear? That's where Aura Ring actually excels as well too. Great perfusion um, in the fingers as well too. So
Hmm.
you can get more accurate measurements here. And guess what? You can fit a ring nicely to your finger that is stable, that isn't too loose. So this is something that you don't have the flexibility of changing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You're just fitting this to begin with. So they have a lot of advantages to their technology because they're getting away from motion artifact. They're getting away from poor blood perfusion on the wrist and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's where they're excelling. They're actually shooting up and growing as a company. Huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they built that psychology into the design more or less.
Yeah. I still haven't gotten an Aura Ring, but I was close at one time where I had a colleague working for Aura Ring. So I tend to wait for my free products to come and stuff like that. I haven't bought a wearable technology in a long time. So
We had Nuraxon's got some ties to Finland,
okay.
which is, obviously where Aura comes from. And so
Mhm.
a few years ago, as kind of like our company holiday gift, everybody got Aura rings.
Oh, great.
And so yeah, and this is funny. It kind of goes back to what you were talking about, where at the start, like I was psyched. I was, looking at my sleep pattern every
Yep.
night, checking it out. Oh, like I was in REM sleep from this time to this time.
Yep.
I woke up, I did all these things. Um, Still wore it consistently, like nightly for
Yeah.
quite a few years, but then it just lost the luster, like I just was like, I'm not doing anything with this information other than just understanding that I sleep okay. I don't sleep great and I don't sleep bad, but I sleep okay. It was really interesting to learn like when I have poor sleep. So like you mentioned, when I was getting sick or after a late night, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so that was like those sort of spot checks I think that you were referring to,
Mhm.
where it was like the sort of monitoring aspect really didn't matter to me. To where I'm, curious about sort of the trends every single day. But
Right.
what was important to me was like, can I look to this quickly and maybe understand something either in the moment or, maybe retrospectively because of, something that's happened, I'm starting to feel sick or whatever. I
Yeah.
just not feeling kind of my top of my game today. So I think that kind of presents an interesting thing too, where it's like, uh, you need to monitor all the time in order to even
Yeah.
deliver that information. And kind of goes back to your connectivity piece. Because if you had to sit there and do a spot check, but then you got to wait for it to connect and wait for it to read and go through that motion, you'd probably lose interest just as it was going on. And
Yeah.
then, do that a few times. And now you're like, okay, I don't really care to check that anymore.
Yeah. Plus, you have to have the baseline to compare to. So if you're
True,
just putting it on to make
true.
those short measurements when you're feeling off, you have all
Yeah.
these data points where you're like, oh, well, I was not feeling 100% at every single point. So what is it?
Yeah.
Is it even
Yeah.
useful?
Yeah, and Zach, you mentioned historical data is important, and that's one thing that I still look at as well too. So you open up the app, you click on your SpO2, your heart rate, or whatever else, your steps, and then it says this is today, And then I always go to, oh, let's do 3 months or a year or something like that.
Hmm.
I really like seeing that perspective as well too. I'm like,
Yeah.
hmm, you know, tend to be more active in the summer months or do this, or, kind of interesting how the graphs and stuff like that go. So those are perspectives that are interesting to me. And like, during the Christmas holidays, I'm not too active, right? Type thing, right? I'm eating more and sitting around and, socializing and doing whatever else. But even the daily activity of the work life, if you will, and not that I'm on my feet doing manual labor or anything like that, but you just are more active, if you will, during those times. So the historical perspective is still of interest to me as well too. How long, you even go back a year and stuff like that, you can actually see that. So it's kind of cool
Yeah.
seeing what's my cumulative distance that I've traveled in a year. It's like, oh wow, I've
Yeah.
I've walked a long way. So
Yeah.
It's your Spotify Wrapped of your
yeah, yeah,
your physiological data.
exactly. Yeah,
That's funny. We'll start to
yeah,
see those getting posted on social media here
yeah.
soon. Well, no, this has been incredibly fascinating and very insightful conversation, Pro. And thanks for kind of taking us through the history and going in the ins and the outs of wearable devices and what that industry is looking like. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to still be worked on. I mean, I think we're just starting to see these kind of become pervasive in the user community, but there's more to gain from it for sure. And that question of so what still needs to be answered in a lot of cases. And it sounds like that's a lot of the work that you're doing over at Sport Product Testing is trying to figure that out for people, or at least help them understand and identify if they are able to even answer that question
Mhm.
and can do so accurately. So, as a consumer, thank you for giving them the lens to be able to look through that stuff. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. Uh, Lindsey, I don't know if you have any other sign offs that you want to give to Pro. But I think we've hit our time for sure. I definitely want to be respectful of that for you. So
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, just thank you for the conversation. Just to echo what Zach said, it has been not just insightful and interesting, but just really like eye-opening to
hmm
see, to have these discussions and see exactly how far the technology has come, but also how far we still have to go and all the questions that still are yet to be answered. So hopefully we'll see that um, in the next couple of years as AI continues to permeate all of these conversations too. But
hmm
yeah, keep doing what you're doing. It's really, really cool stuff. It's really necessary stuff to validate this type of technology too. So, very, very cool.
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
we'll be asking you, hey, is this worth trusting? What do you think?
Yeah.
anytime you want my opinion, I really appreciate you reaching out to me and letting me be part of this podcast. As you probably have gathered, I can talk about this for days. I get really excited. And this is what I love doing. And I've been very fortunate to be able to wake up every day and be very excited about doing what I do and the path that I've chosen. So anytime you guys want to talk or anytime anybody wants to talk about wearable technology, I'm always open for conversations.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we'll definitely have to do this again.
Yeah.
Especially as things go on and we start to see some of these things come online and things change. But really appreciate that. Uh, is there any shout outs you want to give as far as them being able to find you guys online?
Yeah, us online. I mean, you can go to sport product testing all one word.com, and you can hit our website there. You can find us on LinkedIn as well too. So yeah, find out a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. And on that page as well too, you can reach out via a contact form if you want to discuss um, wearable technology, validation of wearable technology, or products in general, sports or wellness products in general. So,
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for all the listeners out there. You know how to find us at Neuraxon USA or at neuraxon.com. And thanks, and we will see you next time.